Gideon is now a retired professor of physics from UWA, developing ultra-stable atomic clocks, which you can tell us more about because I couldn't say much more of it than that. But he's also chiefly a born-again Christian and spent some time wafting around Southeast Asia doing various daring, silly Christian things. So anyway, let's get in. Let's give him a clap because it's put a lot of effort into
Well, thank you for coming.
Keep your mic like this.
Really
Like
close,
this?
yes.
Like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just leave the mic.
Thank you for coming. Now, yeah, I don't want anyone to take anything I say personally, because what I'm talking about here today are models and theories and conspiracies. So it's not on the person, it's on the content. My argument today will be that the flat Earth arguments are in fact a modern day Psyop, psychological operation. And just get this work, and coincidentally, you might say, that the United Nations emblem shows a flat Earth. Make of it what you will. Now, who here believes the Earth is flat? So I would say 30%, maybe.
Maybe more.
Maybe more. Okay. I would argue that you wouldn't if not for the existence of the internet. My contention is that this Psyop is actually a CIA designed Psyop, designed to discredit primarily Christians as crazy people, to divide the truther community and distract us all during this very serious time when tyranny is so rapidly rising. The Psyop may also be a mechanism to eventually justify a clampdown on misinformation. You see, they provide the misinformation and then they clamp down. That's problem, solution, right? This is the typical plan that they use.
Gideon, just before you go to the next bit, can I just, that show of hands, I wanted to do that, I got distracted when I got asked to grab the mic, but can we just do a show of hands of, so we did, who believes it's flat, who believes it's a globe, can we have a show of hands? And can we have a show of hands of people who are undecided? Yeah, that's what I thought, and that's why.
I would say it's about 1/3 of each.
I say it's like
Yeah.
flat and round.
Yeah. My daughter thinks it's one of these, but it's a
I'm not
torus.
sure, I'm just...
She's not sure.
It
but,
could
you
be
know,
anything.
who knows? But it's just good to see those numbers.
So how did the internet, YouTube primarily, help spread a conspiracy theory? This article I'm going to read you now is from the BBC in 2019. I'm quoting from this article. All around the world there are conspiracy theorists who believe the Earth is flat, and their community seems to be growing, judging by the attendance at flat Earth conferences and events. Flat Earthers say YouTube was key in helping them spread their message. One researcher found that of attendees at a Flat Earth conference, nearly all said they first came to the idea through the video sharing platform. The Google-owned company says it's taking action to prevent conspiracy videos from reaching large numbers of people. But Google is a CIA-controlled organization used to spy on everyone, as well as manipulate what we think. It's a real propaganda machine. So you start putting 1 and 2 together and you see where that leads. But modern day flat Earth conspiracy stories, ideas, whatever you want to call it, really started with Eric Dubay, with the publication of his book and video in 2014. And his videos very quickly spread through the internet and YouTube. Who is Eric Dubay? Well, let's have a look. I don't know if you can read this, not so big there, but he's written quite a few books. 200 proofs the Earth is not a spinning ball, flat Earth conspiracy, of course, the Atlantean conspiracy, flat Atlantis, spiritual science, the Earth plane, flat Earth, FAQ. So he's got a lot of these sort of challenging, I would call them in true conspiracy concepts that he's got there. Some of them are a little bit crazy in the titles, depending on where you're coming from. I would say I could honestly state as a scientist that no way is he a serious scientist. Now that I can say unequivocally. I went to his YouTube page, and again you can't really see this. He says that I am a 40-year-old author, yogi, and president of the International Flat Earth Research Society. And over there on the right, also not so clear, he talks about flat Earth and solar systems, and something called the matrix reincarnation soul trap. This doesn't sound like serious science to me. So he's not a Christian, he's a yogi of some sort. So maybe he's a Hindu, and that religion teaches the universe is 150 trillion years old. Even Big Bang believers only believe it's around 13.8 billion years old. He believes in this matrix reincarnation, whatever that is. I don't really know, I don't really care, but it doesn't sound like science. He rejects all of modern physics. Now I looked this up on his website. All modern physics, at least for the last 500 years, and possibly going back even to 2,200 years, since Archimedes and Euclid and people like that. So why would you trust anything this guy says? Look, I must admit, I don't know what all the flat Earth models are. I haven't spent time to investigate them, but I have investigated his and what he says. But not all flat earthers agree with each other also. This is something I also found. They're not monolithic, and they even dispute amongst themselves. And this is from a flat earth website where they say Eric Dubay, who has argued that the globe Earth is from the Freemasons. They claim, I don't know this, they claim that his uncle is a Freemason. So my argument is that Eric Dubay is a CIA asset. And now quoting from this guy Freeman, who's looked into this, he says, there is a tremendous amount of unnecessary confusion today about the shape of the world we live in. Through the use of neurolinguistics coupled with fraudulent and misleading imagery and music in the form of videos and endless memes, a sustained disinformation campaign exploded onto the scene in 2014. These are trademark mind control tactics that are well documented and used throughout the intelligence communities in programs that have been exposed, like MK Ultra and MK Naomi. You guys know MK Ultra program? CIA started in the 80s, I believe it was, or maybe even earlier, even the 60s or 50s. He goes on to say, we know that the criminals in action, CIA, not only have access to weapons of mass distraction and mass deception, but they control the mainstream media in the US just as their counterparts in the UK do. So it really should come as no surprise that this completely fabricated AstroTurf FE Flat Earth movement is their concoction, and that the main players in the Flat Earth are government assets or agents. The irony is, Flat Earth thinks it's blowing the lid off one government agency, that's NASA, while completely ignoring the fact that another government agency, the CIA, set up the astronaut straw man. I mean, this is worth considering. There's this quote from Casey that was published in 1981 where he says, we'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. Now think about that for a minute. By inference, prior to 1981 when he said that, that's an admission that at that point that what the general public believed wasn't false. So the task from that point on, when he made that statement, is to convince them of what they believe is false, turning black to white, white to black, and so forth. So you see how this is about manipulating and destroying the minds of I would say, the next generation, but more broadly, the general public. So I want to teach you a couple of new terms. One is cosmography. Cosmography has two distinct meanings. You can look this up. One of them is that traditionally it has been the proto-science of mapping the general features of the cosmos, the heaven and the earth. The second definition, which came much later, has been used to describe ongoing efforts to determine the large-scale features of the observable universe. Now, we're not interested in that one. We're interested in the first one. This is a cartoon illustration of the flat Earth concept. This is per Eric Dubé. And on the right, I've placed an image taken by a amateur rocket enthusiast who flew what do you call them? Those GoPro cameras into space up to around about 250,000 feet. I was just trying to think, and that's about 76 kilometers. And they took that image. So what I want to do today is compare these two models. However, based on the flat Earth model of Dubé, and I've tried to read up what his model does to explain the features that we live with on this planet, I don't know of any comprehensive flat Earth model that explains all observations, like day-night, seasons, global wind patterns, global currents, the water cycle, cloud formation, magnetic fields, tides, eclipses, and phases of moon, earthquakes, etc. Now, I mean comprehensive. I mean ones where it's a single model that explains all of that. However, the spherical Earth, the globe Earth, if you want to call that, explains all of that. And that's the difference. Now, before we get into this, we need to have a little bit of an understanding about what is science. Cosmology, which you probably know that word, and cosmogony. Cosmogony is the science of the origin of the universe. These are not science. And I'm sure you know astrophysics. Astrophysics is not science. And I'll tell you why in a second. You cannot do repeatable, testable experiments in these areas of study. Yeah, sure, they're areas of study. But this is not the same as making predictions. The trouble with astrophysics and cosmology is you cannot interact with the universe like you can in a lab experiment. So they are observational. And I say they are like stamp collecting. So in terms of the cosmos, you have a theory or have a model and you're trying to test it. All you can do is collect more stamps, collect more images and catalogue into massive databases. But you can't do testable, repeatable experiments. Do you understand that? This is to help you understand how we use science. There are two types then. You're probably already getting the hint of this. There's experimental or operational science. And that's the type of science we use in the present. It's the science from which all the modern technology has arisen. And then there's historical or forensic science. And that's really about past unseen events that are not directly testable. You see, again, I hope I don't shock you, but there's no proofs in science. If you want proofs, go to mathematics. Mathematics has proofs. The scientific method proposes a model, a hypothesis or a theory, and then we try to refute it. Experimental and historical science hypotheses can be refuted, but not proven. So anyone that used the word proof in a scientific sense doesn't understand the scientific method. This cosmography. Now I want to talk about ancient cosmography. Right? This is about those ideas that were held in the past, that people developed. And so we want to look at what they are. And what those ancient texts describe are not testable. There's no experiment you can do to test them. The Bible, though, as we have to admit, is not a science textbook. I'm not saying that the Bible's wrong. In fact, I believe the Bible's right about everything it says. But it requires interpretation. Genesis tells us what God did, but it doesn't give us very much detail. And the problem with historical science, you could also call it forensic science, is we cannot travel into the past. We can't observe what God did. So for this reason, it's very weak. Only if we have an eyewitness can we know what happened in the past, but even then, the reliability of the eyewitness is always tested. Like even in a court case, even an eyewitnesses aren't always believed. So the scriptures tell us that God was there in the beginning. And I do trust the word of God, absolutely. I believe in ex nihilo, means out of nothing, creation of the universe about 6,000 years ago. I'm a biblical creationist. But still, what we observe now in the present is only circumstantial. We weren't there when he created everything, so how did he create the world? And that's really the question that this comes down to today. Scripture, biblical scriptures, deal with the past. And much of, within the Christian community anyway, a lot of support comes from those scriptures. But they must be interpreted correctly, and often that will be where different people disagree. 2 Peter 1:20 tells us that no prophecy or no scripture is of any private interpretation. That means no one man's interpretation. Scripture must be compared with scripture. And a single person doesn't necessarily have the correct interpretation. No experimental science that is done in the present can determine anything about the past. So this is the basis of what we have to understand and as we approach this subject. So just remind me again, we're now looking at ancient cosmography. What was the shape of the earth? Or what did the ancients believe it was? Or what do the scriptures describe it to be? So let's look at the scriptures then. The first verse in the Bible, Genesis 1:1, and we'll get to more detail of this in a minute. It says, "In the beginning God created." Now, this is a faith statement. It's not scientific. I believe it, but it's a faith statement. And there's no experiment you can do to test that statement. Genesis tells us what God did, but it does not give us the detail. So we can divide what we're discussing here today into two areas. The shape of the earth from the scriptures and historical texts, that's other historical texts, not just scripture. That is historical science. And the second category is the shape of the earth from measurements now, in the present, done now. That is experimental science. And I would add, there's something we have to understand. No matter what model or thesis or theory we propose, we all have initial starting assumptions. We have presuppositions. And those initial starting assumptions, often, like an axiom, has no further foundation. It's implicitly assumed to be true. So we need to recognize that, because that's the basis upon which we build everything else. Genesis 1:1. Let's have a look at that. For those who read Hebrew, I've got the Hebrew there for you. So the first verse says, in the beginning God created. Hebrew word is bara for create, which is reserved for God only. He created the heaven. The word heavens, heaven or heavens, is the Hebrew word shamayim, which is plural in plural form. And the earth, Hebrew word is eretz. So when we look at this, the statement is that God in the beginning created the universe. He created everything. The last part, the heaven and the earth, is a merism. It's a Hebrew idiom. And Hebrew idiom would take two parts of a whole, one part, second part, and put them together, and that now describes the complete whole. And that, in this case, is telling us God created the whole universe. But it also tells us He created the Shemayim, the heavens, and the earth. Now I want to get on to the next verse. There's verses that are sort of partly at the core of some of this discussion. In Genesis 1:6-8, we read, particularly in the King James, God created the firmament. And the Hebrew word there is rakia. And I will argue that the correct translation of that is expanse. And then the next verse you read, 1:20, God said, let the birds fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. So God created a space in the creation story. God created this firmament in the midst of the waters below, the waters which became the earth, and there were waters above the firmament. You can read this. But the main point I want to focus on is the meanings of these words. So, verse 20 tells us that God created this space for birds to fly through or in, which is, from an earth observer perspective, is like looking up, right? That's the face of the heaven, the face of the sky, the Shemayim. The word firmament, it derives from firmamentum, from the Latin Vulgate, which was translated from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew text, about 200 BC. The Greek word there used was stereoma, which means firm or solid structure. And even the word firmament has that kind of sound in English, doesn't it? That it's firm, it's hard, it's solid. No doubt the Babylonian cosmography, which is the one you often see represented on the internet, was influenced by this. But the Hebrew word rakia really means space. Otherwise, verse 1 makes no sense. And I'll explain. If it was only a glass dome over a flat earth, the universe would be very small indeed. See, it makes no sense in terms of the greatness of God. Clearly, it includes the atmosphere where the birds fly. Birds don't fly through a solid, as we know it, anyway. And quickly looking up some other translations to get various variation of the heavens and the earth, We get one translated in 2020, says on the face of the expanse of the heavens, focusing on the heavens. Another one translated in 2008, across the face of the firmament of the heavens. And another one, Holman, which I don't know when it was translated, across the expanse of the sky. So there's no esoteric or hidden knowledge here. The translators have just tried to do their best with the knowledge that they had. Now, Eric Dubay is a yogi, which means he's probably a Hindu religion in some form, or I don't know really exactly. The Bible says the earth hangs on nothing, but it certainly doesn't describe anything like this, does it? There's no mention of 4 giant elephants or any even bigger turtle swimming through the vacuum of space. Now, just a little bit, I don't know if you like jokes. This is a joke. That's not the joke. I'm saying what I'm going to tell you is the joke. This was someone talking on this model. I shouldn't really say it's a model. This Hebrew conception at a conference. And a woman who believed the elephants and the turtle actually held up the earth was asked, what held up the turtle? She said, another turtle. And before the questioner could point out the obvious problem, she said, aha, I know what you are going to say, but the answer is there are turtles all the way down. That's pretty good. So yes, we're looking at the globe as the different view, the different model, hypothesis, call it what you like. And I would like to look at some of the scriptures on this, which are some of the key ones people use. The first one I want to look at is in the book of Job, what it has to say about the spherical planet. Job 28:7. He stretches there, the Hebrew word nata. He stretches out the north over the empty place. The Hebrew word used there is tohu, meaning nothing, and hangs the earth upon nothing. The Hebrew word used is belima, and that means nothing whatsoever. So going back now, nata, stretches, has a broad range of meanings, but it includes to show, to spread or spread out, to stretch forth, stretch out, to pitch, like pitch a tent, or even put up a curtain. The empty space, or empty place, tohu, means desolation, and hence nothing. Nothing is seen. The second nothing, the one there, the Hebrew word belima, has the meaning of nothing whatever, nothing whatsoever. So it is telling us the earth hangs in empty space, which we call vacuum. Now the next verse is from the book of Isaiah. A lot of people like to quote this one. Isaiah 40:22. It is he that sits on the circle. This is the Hebrew word kug, the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers. That stretches, this is the same Hebrew word, nata, stretches out the heavens as a curtain and spreads, Hebrew word there is machzach, spreads them out as a tent to dwell in. So the Hebrew word kug has the meaning of circle. And you might interpret that as a circular disc, but it is equally valid as the great circles on the face of the globe, which we call longitude lines. These things. Just going back a minute. So when we look at this verse, we look at the context of this verse, it really looks like what God is trying to tell us, that he is looking down on his creation. And he sees us as grasshoppers. So it's like he's up there in space and he's looking down. In this case, above means with respect to the earth. Anywhere above the surface of the planet is above, by definition. And in this verse we also see the same word nata, the Hebrew word, which has the meanings which include to show and pitch. So when the word, there's the word matha, that's the last one, to spreads. This has the meaning of spread out, like putting up a tent. It's like saying God created the heavens in a manner that the inhabitants of Isaiah's time would have understood from putting up a tent or hanging up a curtain. It doesn't have any meaning, or it doesn't imply any meaning of cosmological expansion, like an expanding universe. Not at all. It's just like God's creation, and he put it up just as they would pitch a tent. Remember, language in the Bible is always taken in terms of the context of the time and those who are hearing it. So this brings us back to the vacuum of space. The globe is spinning in space, supported by nothing. But practically, it is falling towards the sun as it moves around it in the annual solar cycle. And that description fits very nicely what we observe. Now these are those longitudinal lines again that we all know, very familiar with them. Every 15 degrees is 1 hour around the Earth, 24 hours, and that sets the time zones of the planet. So these circles encompass the globe. And as the Earth rotates, 24 hours, every 24 hours it rotates, half of the Earth is in daylight and the other half in darkness. This model easily explains the day-night cycle. But one exact rotation of the planet is not actually 24 hours. It's 24 hours minus 4 minutes. And that's because to get back to the exact same spot as the Earth, the planet rotates, it doesn't trace out the 24 hours. And we can see that from the positions of the stars. It's called the sidereal time. The extra 4 minutes is because the Earth moves in its orbit around the sun. And so in that 24-hour period, the Earth has moved a bit, and the Earth has to spin that little bit more, that 4 minutes, so it's now facing back in the same direction toward the sun. That is well understood and explained by this model. So this shows you the explanatory power of the globe spinning in space. It explains the day-night cycle, the seasons, which are determined by the tilt of the axis. I haven't gone into explaining that, but the tilt gives you the seasonal variation. The distance to the sun is quite constant. The Earth's in nearly a totally circular orbit around the sun. So it's not due to variation of distance. It's due to the tilt of that axis. Dubé's flat Earth models cannot do this in terms of a single comprehensive model, despite his claims. The next verse I want to look at is Proverbs 8:27, uses the same Hebrew word kug. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass, that's the Hebrew word kug, upon the face of the depth, or the oceans. So this verse is used, this word is only used 3 times in the Bible. And here a compass is translated a compass because it's the type of compass used to inscribe a circle. This time it's on the oceans, which fits the great circles of the planet, the longitudes and the latitudes, which are also circles around the planet. Now, I don't know if you refer to Bible commentators, but I like John Gill. He was a Baptist pastor and Bible commentator. He lived back there in the 17th century. At the age of 11, he learned Greek. He also proficiently learned Latin and Hebrew, so he was quite a scholar. And he wrote this: in reference to Isaiah 40:22. He said, "It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth." Okay, he's translated that Hebrew word as circle. Or globe. And that little Z sign there is his reference mark that we'll read in a minute. A globe of it, for the earth is spherical or globular, not a flat plane, but round, hung as a ball in the air. Don't forget, this is about going back now 300 years ago. And in his references, he cites these different gentlemen listed down the bottom there, and what they said about it. A superspherium, a globum, a superorbum tellulist. I don't speak Latin, but that sounds like Latin to me. And these particular references or scholars are these guys. Pagnino, or Pagninius in Latin, from the 15th century. He was a Dominican and one of the leading philologists and Bible scholars of his day. The next guy, Montanus, 16th century, supervised the translation of the Antwerp Polyglot Bible, and Franciscus Vatablus, 16th century, translating another Latin Bible. So these guys were skilled in terms of Bible translation. And Vitringa, Dutch Protestant Hebraist from the 17th century, and he wrote a commentary on Isaiah. So I'm giving you those because these guys were not, they were learned scholars. They were not just some internet jockey. Okay, another verse in Job 37:18. I've got two different translations here, and this one is often used by the flat earth proponents. Can you, like him, spread, and the word spread here is Hebrew, is raka, spread out the skies hard as a cast metal mirror. That's from the ESV. And the King James, have you with him spread out the sky, which is strong and as a molten looking glass. So this takes us back to the firmament. And the imagery in Debay's, anyway, his model is this glass dome or solid dome of some form. And so let's have a look at this. The word there in that verse translated spread is actually Hebrew araka, which has the range of meanings to pound the earth, by analogy to expand by hammering, and by implication to overlay with thin sheets of metal. So, how do we interpret this? Both translations capture the idea that the sky, or the skies, are like a mirror. The sky is like a mirror, but also something that was cast and spread out by beating or by pouring a molten mirror. Now the verse doesn't necessarily refer to space itself, but only to the sky as viewed from the Earth's surface. The mirror refers to the transparency of the glass, meaning the atmosphere is clear to see through, hence we may view the stars. But this could also mean the transparency of space, of the vacuum, because light travels through vacuum without hindrance. So the firmament or the expanse is clear for light to travel through, but is like a beaten material. That means it could be stiff, like a metal. You might say this refers to the firmament dome over the flat earth, but it's nothing like that. I have an alternative interpretation in regards to something we do measure in the lab. Now that's experimental science that we can do today. Have you heard of 0 point energy? Who's heard of 0 point energy? Vacuum energy, polarization of the vacuum, any of those terms? It's a real phenomenon that the vacuum appears to be full of energy, very high density energy. So one theory is that the vacuum is extremely stiff yet light propagates through it. In fact, all measurements so far in the lab indicate the energy density in the vacuum is infinite. That sounds pretty amazing. We must correct for this fact in our modern atomic clocks. And now I've just given you one illustration of one on the right. The type of clocks that I worked with, I didn't build atomic fountain clocks, but I built a cryogenic sapphire clock that was used as a flywheel to drive this type of atomic clock. The corrections, there are many corrections that need to be made with these clocks due to external effects. There's one correction that has to be made, and it's called the Lamb shift. And this is the splitting of energy levels due to the 0-point energy coming from the vacuum. It's real energy. So we could theorize the vacuum as the most energy-dense substance in the universe. This would really fit with our understanding of what the Hebrew words imply, even though, as I say again, the Bible is not a scientific text. So you could interpret rakia, that Hebrew word, the expanse or firmament, as the vacuum of space with this extremely high energy density. And the birds fly through the face of the expanse, the heavens in Genesis, described in Genesis 1, which we call sky. So this leads us to back to this verse again, Job 38:18. And I want to point out that not only it talks about what we've already mentioned, but it uses the word strong. So it has that suggestion of that infinite energy density of the vacuum of space. No glass dome is suggested. The verse uses the expression as a looking glass, but you'll note as, the word as in English, this is a simile. This is an form of idiom in English. And various scholars claim this picture, that one, is the Hebrew, Babylonian, Sumerian, and even Mayan conception of the cosmogony, the cosmology and cosmogony of the world. Those ancient people interpreted the world as they saw it, and various verses in the Bible have elements of this. But to draw this picture, it needs a lot of eisegesis, that is, reading into Scripture ideas that are not there. Now, there are no proofs. I already mentioned this, but I need to go over this. Science cannot prove anything. It can only disprove hypotheses and theories. There is no experiment to prove the Earth is flat. Conversely, or whatever the word is, there's no experiment to prove the Earth's a global sphere. There isn't. Bible-believing scientists, for at least the last 1,000 years, set out to understand God's creation. People like Newton, Maxwell, Kepler, Galileo, Faraday, and many, many more. There are so many, it would be very hard to list them all. They took the presuppositional view, the Bible is truth, and proceeded to build on that foundation. Greeks believed the laws of nature or physics were, I should say, Greeks did not believe those laws were unchanging. But the Bible-believing scientists did. In fact, this is the basis upon which we have the scientific revolution that occurred after we got into the age of reason, into the Renaissance. Those scientists believed we could trust a reasonable, rational creator, and his laws are the same today as they always have been. This fact allows us to use the scientific method. This is only, though, of course, in operational science, to test those laws. What fails is discarded, and what doesn't is retained. So see, we're not about proving, we're about proposing hypotheses and trying to refute them. Thus, we build a picture of the universe around us. All the measurements and observations to date point to a spherical planet. I'm not using the word proof, ever. Who has a cell phone? One guy has one. I would say everyone in this room probably has a cell phone. Or two. Cell phones use all this physics. All the physics that Eric DeBay on his website rejects, all are used in the cell phone. All of this is repeatable operational science. And here they are. The laws of motion and optics is Newton. Gravitation, Newton, Einstein. Thermodynamics, Maxwell, Kelvin, Gibbs, and these are only some of the players. Radio, electromagnetism, Hertz, Tesla, Edison, Marconi, Faraday, Maxwell, Volta, Galvani. Quantum mechanics, quantum mechanics is used in your phone. Heisenberg, Planck. Relativity, Einstein, Sagnac, and Michelson. Et al. That's where all the other guys are missed out. But all of that is used in a modern cell phone. That is the same science that was developed, starting with largely Bible-believing scientists back at least 500 years ago. So I say at this point, if you put it this way, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't throw out the advances of modern science that have occurred at least in the last 500 years because of other concepts and notions you have where you no longer trust NASA or some other institution. So let me take you back 2,200 years. A lot of you probably know Eratosthenes of Cyrene. He was a Greek born in, Cyrene is nowadays Libya. So around about 200 BC, he knew that on the summer solstice, June 21st, he knew that the sun's rays were directly overhead. That's at the Tropic of Cancer. So they're directly overhead and cast no shadow. He observed that over the seasons. He was living at Alexandria at the time, and he placed a rod, a pole if you like, it's called a gnomon. It's the same as you see on a sundial. And it cast a shadow that's tended 7 degrees on that shadow. And as theory goes, he paid someone to pace out the distance from Syene, which is Aswan today, to Alexandria. And it turns out in modern units, it's about 800 kilometres. They were using units of stadia, something like that. Which a stadia, by the way, comes from those racetracks where they race the chariots around. One length was a stadia, and of course that's where the word stadium come from, and so on, right? Anyway, so all he had to do was measure that angle and measure the distance for that arc length and use trigonometry, and he worked out that the radius or the circumference of the planet, and he got that within 10% of the modern day value. There was a guy, his name, I'll get it in a minute, there was a guy who repeated his experiment in 2012, a guy called Mora. He repeated the calculation and used more precise methods of measuring that angle and the distance and he got the circumference of the Earth to be 40,074 kilometres. That's the polar, through the poles. And that was within 0.16% different from Eratosthenes' result. So this is worth remembering, that from this measurement you can get the radius of the planet or the diameter of the planet, and then we're going to use that, or it will be used a little bit later. So I hope this is not too much science for you, but that measurement puts to death the myth that no one believed in a spherical planet in the last 2,200 years, because it's totally untrue. There were various stories and myths around, yes, but within the scientific community anyway, within even the royalty of various countries, they believed in a globe. And Isabella of Spain in 1492 spent the equivalent, I'm not sure exactly what it was, I once read it in gold, like a ton of gold or something like that, that is equivalent to something like Elon Musk is spending on a Mars shot. Well, she spent that and put that together, and Columbus then went and sailed westward because they knew the Earth was a sphere, and he wanted to sail to India. But of course he bumped into a bit of a landmass that got in the way, and he called it the West Indies. So we can't say that the spherical Earth is something new, modern, certainly not since NASA. Now the next science I want you to learn a little bit about is called geodesy. And geodesy is the science derived from those two words. Geo means earth, and Dicy means I divide, so you put them together and you get geodesy means dividing the earth. And that's what essentially Eratosthenes was doing. Does this work? Oh yeah, it does. There are three circles drawn on here. One is called the sphere, the circle, like the cross section of a sphere. The next one is called the ellipsoid, and the next one is called the geoid. The Earth is spinning, and based on the physics of a spinning body covered with water, which the planet is, we expect the surface of the Earth to bulge out into an ellipsoid. That means the equator has a larger diameter than the poles, through the poles. And we measure that, and I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute. And then there's another surface called the geoid. So the Earth is actually not on the ellipsoid at all. It's on what we call the geoid. And the geoid, I'll explain what that is. So as part of this science of geodesy, measuring the size and shape of the Earth, it includes the gravitational field at various locations on the Earth. And the geoid is simply the surface where the gravity is 1 little g, or 9.8 meters per second, what we normally call the acceleration due to gravity at sea level, right? In fact, the sea, the surface of the oceans, all sit at the geoid. And this is represented in an exaggerated but color code. That means even the oceans bulge up or sink down in various places. It's not a smooth surface, but it's a lumpy surface because of these various effects of the rotation, the gravitational field. Actually, there are many, many effects that affect the geoid, including the planets, the sun, the weather, the atmosphere, the water content, the crustal movements, even the spinning molten core that provides a magnetic field to give us the Earth magnetic field. And therefore, those little compass things will work to north and south. But all of those effects go together to form this true surface of the Earth. It is illustrated here. It's exaggerated. If you were looking at it on real scale, you wouldn't be able to see anything. It would look very smooth, but it is lumpy. And the way it's done is we have satellites, we call them constellations. The GPS, the Global Positioning System satellites, I think there's about 25 in that original constellation. There's also GLONASS, which is owned by the Russians, and Galileo is owned by the Europeans. And they all have around 25, 30 satellites, and now you've recently heard that Elon Musk is putting up 40,000 low Earth orbit satellites, but forget about him. These ones are used, one point first is these satellites have an altitude of about 20,000 kilometers, and they fly around, they're constantly moving. So in your phones, which use this, the phones are tracking generally about 6 satellites at any one time. And that's how you know where you are on the surface of the Earth. This is how we use this for navigation, and the Americans use it for smart bombs too, which is not a very good thing. But we also use it for surveying. I've got that picture of a surveyor over there, and we use it to map the crustal movements of the planet. This is a GPS receiver that's been cemented into solid bedrock. These points all over the Earth have these, and over time we can see the crustal plates, which our friend Abram here, Abram is a geophysicist. They measure the changes in those crustal plates as they're moving around in real time. They're moving, and we can see them moving. Yeah, it's not much, might be a centimetre per year, but it's moving. Well, none of this works on a flat Earth. I don't know how you have GPS constellations of satellites over a flat Earth. I don't know what holds them up there. And I haven't mentioned the Earth's magnetic field, certainly not very much, but the spinning molten core of the Earth gives us that magnetic field. But it also tells us why the magnetic field is separated from the spin axis. The compass needle doesn't point to true north. It's about 11 degrees off true north. So the surface of the planet is affected by many, many factors. Modern techniques, particularly with space-based observation platforms, measure those changes. And then there's geostationary satellites. A geostationary satellite sits at an altitude of about 36,000 kilometers, and geostationary means as the Earth rotates, the satellite moves exactly synchronized with that rotation. So it has to sit above the equator, because there's no other point where it could sit. And there's many of them around the equator. And it's always looking down. If you're looking vertically down from it, it would be over the exact same spot over the surface of the Earth. And time zones, we all know about time zones in various places. They result from this spherical shape because, I was talking to a guy on Thursday night there. He was sitting in New York on Zoom, and it was dark here. So here we have this time zone. I showed you that map earlier of the longitudinal lines that trace out those time zones around the planet. And all countries of the world use those. We also have satellites in polar orbit that are not geostationary. How does that work on a flat Earth? Because in at least the Dubé model, there is no South Pole. I don't understand how the satellite could travel around that. It doesn't make any sense to me. With geostationary satellites, we can transmit signals from a ground station to another ground station via that satellite, by sending the signal and it retransmits it back to another one. And we can do that even though the Earth is curved, it's a sphere. We can't see directly across there, but we can send those signals. That's consistent with a spherical planet. And personally, I have done this myself. So back some years ago, sitting at the lab in Perth at UWA, we have an atomic clock there, and I wanted a signal. I compare my clock with a signal at the National Measurement Institute in Sydney. They have atomic clocks there also. And the curvature of the Earth will not allow us to transmit a direct microwave signal from Perth to Sydney, right? It's impossible. That's only 4,000 kilometres. So I positioned up the antenna on the roof of the physics building and connected with a geostationary satellite over the equator, and we were able to transmit our signal around about 72,000 kilometres, bouncing it off and down. Yeah, the signals are very weak travelling over those distances, but with very high gain amplifiers we could do this, and for several months we did that, comparing the two clocks on each end of that system. So I personally have experienced this. I don't know how you could explain that any other way. And I would say, as far as the flat Earth model, the International Space Station absolutely refutes it. Now, there are many other things, but I say this because there's no need for NASA, no need for believe NASA tells the truth. Sure, maybe they're lying. No telescope is needed. You can use your own eyes or buy a pair of binoculars. And you can look up the flight schedule, where you are, your location, latitude and so on the NASA website. Yep, you can look it up on the Liars website, and the space station will fly across the sky exactly according to the schedule that they give on their website. So that doesn't rely on the believability of NASA. You are testing. That's experimental science. That's observational and experimental that you can do, and you can repeat it every single day. So the space station travels through space, through that vacuum, at around about 400 kilometre altitude. So it's not geostationary. It's a very low Earth orbit, and it's moving very fast. Across the sky, it takes 6 minutes to get across your sky. I think the total orbit around the Earth is only about 90 minutes, so it's travelling very fast. But there's no atmosphere. There's no friction. There is actually a little bit of atmosphere, but very low density. And my last point I want to make is, who observed the eclipse? It was only a few days ago, 23rd of April, right? You didn't look at it, right?
Yeah, with special glasses.
Oh, okay. All right. So this eclipse also refutes the flat Earth model. And let me explain. In the globe model, the moon is in orbit around the Earth, and the sun, and the moon gets in the way of the sun and blocks off some of the sunlight, and it projects a dark spot onto the surface of the Earth. The one that occurred on April 23rd is called a hybrid eclipse because it's special. Only occurs about 5% of all eclipses. And in that one, if you were in different places on the Earth, that's what that cartoon is meant to illustrate, you could see either the total eclipse, which is where the sun is completely blacked out, or annular, where the moon looks a little bit smaller than the sun and you see a ring around it from the same eclipse at the same time, but in different locations. I don't see how the flat Earth model can provide an eclipse, let alone the more complex versions of even hybrid eclipses. With the sun spinning around on the opposite side of a circle to the moon, I don't see any eclipsing that occurs at all. Now, I mentioned to you earlier, you need to remember Eratosthenes, because the Greek astronomer Aristarchus of Samos, who lived around the time of Eratosthenes, was the first to measure the distance to the sun. He used the phases of the moon. In fact, he made 4 measurements: full moon, half moon, and the lunar and solar eclipses, to measure the sizes and the distance of the sun and the moon. So he got the ratios of the diameters of those bodies and the ratio of the distances to those bodies, and there was only one thing he needed to actually calculate the absolute distances, and that was the diameter of the Earth. And he took that from Eratosthenes. and then he was able to determine the distance to the sun of 150 million kilometers. And that was 2,200 years ago, and that's the same number that we have today. But let me take you to the moon. That's not bad, eh? Take you to the moon. This is again not NASA. A private Japanese company called iSpace sent a probe to the moon. They flew around the moon several times, and they were flying around the moon on April 23rd. And they looked back at the Earth. They flew there, they were attempting to land on the moon, and this video will show their attempt to land. So I want to show you this video.
The sun. Look at it, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful and then very incredible pictures taken from our under.
It is truly amazing how a privately funded spacecraft can capture the moon and the Earth like this and send the image back. Now, Hitachi-san, looking at this, I think this image also contains some scientific, very, very interesting speciality. Can you explain it a bit more?
Oh, yes, yeah. So this is the picture of the Earth lies on the moon, but most interestingly, you know, as you can see, if you can take a very closer look at the Earth, so we see actually the shadow of the moon on the Earth. So you see that black spot there, the close to the Australia. So this is actually the shadow of the moon. So we took this picture during the solar eclipse. So it's really interesting to see this kind of the phenomena, not from the Earth, but from the lunar orbit. So this is very interesting and very exciting picture.
So do you understand what that is? They have an orbiter moving around the moon, and they look back at the Earth at the time of the solar eclipse, and the moon's shadow is seen on the planet Earth. The sun is behind them, behind the moon. This is the lunar surface here. And you're seeing this shadow from the sun. By the way, that thing doesn't look like a flat disk either, and nor does the moon. This is observational, but it's experimental. It's testable. It's observable now in the present, testable experiment. This is repeatable. This does not rely on the interpretation of historical texts.
Where are the stars? Is it right here? CGI.
Private companies
I forgot to put the stars in.
Okay. Is this working? Yeah. You don't see the stars because the gain of the cameras are set because of the brightness. It's called albedo. The amount of light reflected from the lunar surface and from the Earth is so bright, it's just like the aperture setting in your camera. You have to tone it down, otherwise you would swamp the CCD elements in the camera. This is absolutely what you see all the time. So I say, let's not be derailed by the Psyop. Don't be MK Ultra. All the flat Earth ideas, and there are many, and as I said, I don't know all of them, are well-known mind control techniques intended to create confusion and produce the condition known as cognitive dissonance. Flat Earth Psyop promoters use weapons of mass destruction. I'm talking about people like Eric DeBay and people like that, and mass destruction of your mind. A spinning globe hanging on nothing is consistent with the scriptures, and it's consistent with the observations we have made for the past 500 years of modern operational science. And as I told you also, even back to 2,200 years ago with Eratosthenes and Aristarchus, I think the other guy's name was. So don't get distracted by misinformation. In the scriptures we read, the Lord of promise is not slow as some deem slowness, but is long-suffering toward us, not purposing any to perish, but all to turn oneself to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away. So the skies, those heavens around the planet, will pass away with a loud noise, being burning up the elements will be dissolved, and the earth and the works in it will be burned up. Sounds like the whole surface of the earth, the planet, the surface of it anyway, will be destroyed. Therefore, all these things being about to be dissolved, of what sort ought you to be in holy behaviour and godliness, looking for and hastening the coming of the day of God, through which the heavens being set on fire will be dissolved. So maybe we've got to be really careful about a little bit what Kathy was saying about how intense we get into this discussion. How relevant is it to us? And it says the elements will be burned up. But according to his promise, we look for new heavens and new earth in which righteousness dwells. And if you want to check out more information on this, you'll find a lot of good stuff on my own website, BibleScienceForum.com. You just put in the search box Flat Earth and you'll get quite a few articles. And also go to creation.com. They have some very good articles, but there's one very good one there refuting Flat Earth. Thank you very much.